Hello, everyone. It's episode 6 of That's Creative, and we have a few questions. Where does street art come from? What's it all about? What's within the law and what's not? In this episode, we spoke to street artist Tom Blackford, and he answered all your burning questions about this edgy art form. Tom's a practicing street artist and designer. He talked us through the way he approaches his work and what life is like as an artist in 2020. Enjoy.
So we know you as a street artist and an illustrator, fine artist. You're pretty much multi-talented in the sense of the world of art, shall we say. So, but for those people who have started this podcast and listening, give us a background introduction. Who are you? What do you do? Where have you come from?
Yeah, so I'm an artist. I'm an illustrator. I'd say. And then I sit somewhere between being a graffiti artist and a street artist, in the sense that I started painting on the street through being interested in graffiti, and then I suppose later years, so in my maybe mid-20s to now, it's the work that I'm producing is sort of like a combination of my illustration work and my background in graffiti, and therefore probably sits more on the side of street art a lot of the time. So I tend to paint illustrative work in the street, and then I'll paint graffiti work with my friends that do graffiti, and then there's the personal work that I do from home, which is I suppose fine art, but more somewhere between illustration and fine art. So paintings, canvases, illustration work. Commercially and just for personal pleasure.
And so you drew a distinction there between street art and graffiti art. And what is the difference between those two? Where does one end and the other begin? Why are they different?
I suppose graffiti started in New York on the subway trains in the 1970s, and that was predominantly all about having a tag. So having a name that you've given yourself and then attempting to place that tag in as many places as possible. One of the places being on subway cars in New York. And the reason for that is because people realized if they painted trains, the trains would travel and they'd, go from one part of New York to the next. So people from different locations would see their work traveling around. So I'd say graffiti is born out of a love for letter forms and tagging, whereas street art is more about illustrative iconography that's painted or put up in an attempt to communicate with a wider audience outside of graffiti artists. So graffiti artists are only really interested in gaining respect and recognition from their peers, whereas street artists, I think, for the most part, are more interested in their work being seen by the masses and then potentially in galleries and whatnot. So that's the fundamental difference.
Right.
Yeah, there's a certain stigma with like graffiti in the sense that graffiti is bad, but street art doesn't really have that message, I suppose, or surrounding themes around it. But do you feel like having street art blown up in the last few years, like I feel like it has done, has sort of made people appreciate graffiti more? Or
yeah, definitely.
Still think people see a tag and go, well, that's just mess.
I think so. In the early 2000s, well, maybe early to mid 2000s, obviously Banksy became a big name, and I think what that did is legitimized street art, but also just made the general public pay more attention in general to what was being painted on the walls. So I think there's a little bit more appreciation of graffiti, but these days. But I think tagging in its raw form is still something that the public, I don't think they quite. I don't think, publicly admired. I think that the public in general are still going to relate to pictures as opposed to tagging and graffiti for the general public, and I totally understand that. But I think in terms of murals, that's become widely more used in terms of like advertisers using it in their campaigns and artists being hired to paint walls. And I don't think that would have necessarily been for an explosion in street art.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So just to recap, so graffiti is sort of internally focused, and it's names and letters, and street art is a wider audience and it's illustrative. And yeah, I think it's really interesting what you said about Banksy sort of legitimizing street art. And I think that on that point, are there some walls that you can paint on and some that you can't? Like, how do you gauge what is an appropriate wall? What's the arrangement that people have?
So in London, there have been for at least the last 20 years legitimate areas you can paint that only really graffiti artists know about, which are called halls of fame, which is where you go to, I guess, try and showcase your best work. So you've got a place in Stockwell, you've got a place in Tottenham called Maresfield Park. You've got a lot that are now shut down. There used to be one in Tufnell Park that was quite big. Used to have a very famous one in Latimer Road, Westbourne Park, called The Pit, which has since fallen victim to gentrification. But then you've got other places that have now opened up, such as Leek Street in Waterloo, which I know we've all been there and done a few workshops. And then you've got Shoreditch, which has become sort of the place to kind of paint. It's the rules are very relaxed there, so lots of hoardings all around that part of town are accessible to paint.
Well, would you just rock up that day and paint a hoarding, or would you have to get permission beforehand?
It depends on your mindset, really. I don't think you run the risk of being arrested should you do it. I know that there are some that offer the hoardings to artists. And in some cases, if you're, say, a foreign artist and you don't really know the rules and regulations, you might go through that company and that company will say, oh, these hoardings on this street, it's fine, go and paint something. But yeah, you just got to kind of use a bit of common sense. I mean, if a whole street side is laden with graffiti, you're not going to have a problem painting there. And I think the authorities, there's so much going on around there that it's a waste of their time to stop anyone from creating, in essence, a nice piece of art. So yeah, Shoreditch has become a massive hotspot. That's generally where a lot of people will go now to create street art and graffiti. So yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So tell us a little bit about how you got into street art and how you started out as an artist.
So I've always drawn. I know it's a cliche, but like I've always drawn since I was a kid. I think it's always been like a therapeutic thing for me. Always been something I go towards. And then I guess when I was starting secondary school, and that was in '93. That's kind of, so like hip hop came over from the US in really the late 80s and early 90s. And with that, graffiti seemed to be synonymous with it. So there was this kind of explosion, I guess. And in the school I went to, right around the age when I was probably like 12, 13, everyone was into graffiti. Every kid at school had a tag. There were tags going up, being done in the school. We even had a piece of graffiti in our I don't want to say playground, but the interior of the school, there was this big graffiti piece that said info. Who's an artist who I since learned has passed away, which is really sad. But the story behind that was apparently, and the teachers didn't know what to do about it. So they offered him this one wall in the school to paint something really nice on the condition that he would stop tagging, the hallways of the school and whatnot. So I remember being at school and seeing this piece and it was the first time that I'd seen of like well-constructed graffiti in the flesh, so to speak. I remember that having an effect on me. Into the rebellious side of it and being a pissed off, angry little shit and getting into tagging. And it wasn't really until I think university that I started to take it more seriously in terms of working out where you get the paint, what the certain caps are, how to create different effects, how to use can control. So I really got into just mastering this new art that, you know, I guess isn't taught at schools. It's very much, like you said earlier, an insular culture, which I was always into anyway. I've always been into subcultures. So it kind of just, it attracted me for so many reasons. It was the art style was sort of similar to, you know, there were like the parts of it that were connected to like the comic books that I was reading or the animation that I was into. It all sort of felt like home to me. So yeah, I guess it wasn't really until my mid-20s that I started taking it seriously and found that I was not bad at it. It kind of connected with me and felt like a very natural thing to step into. Also, having the experience of having drawn my whole life and drawing comic book related stuff and illustrations, picking up a spray can, and it all just felt quite natural. And then it got to a point where I was, you know, thinking, what am I going to do for a living? Should I follow the illustration route? Should I don't know, that's all I really wanted to ever do, be an illustrator for a while. But as we were saying earlier, once the street art explosion happened, it seemed more possible to then explore the concept of being able to paint murals potentially for a living.
So how does that... Oh, sorry, Annie.
No, go on. If you want.
I was just going to ask, how does that work in 2019, 2020? How do you be a street artist or a mural artist for a living? How is that possible? What sort of thing do you do?
In terms of finding the work?
Yeah, and like, how do you survive doing it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy. I mean, I'm still struggling with it. I'm still needing to do additional commercial stuff in order to maintain that lifestyle. I'll do illustration jobs on the side, but I've built up a small reputation, you know, and jobs have led to jobs.
Would you say that choosing this path has had like an impact in how you live, or do, you know, friends, family, do they? I mean, as an artist, you sort of myself.
It's a lifestyle that's not conventional, but I don't think the negative connotations outweigh the positive. I think it's all about balance. So yeah, I mean, there have been periods where like work's been dry and I've questioned, you know, oh God, what am I doing? Can I carry on doing? Then I look back and I think, well, I have managed to do this for the last 10 years. So if that's taught me anything, it's that things do work out and jobs will come. And I've also learned that just in the periods where I'm not getting any work, just to concentrate on my personal work and just to stay motivated and to just keep pumping out stuff and stay in the public consciousness essentially is very important, not just on the personal level, but for potential clients to see what you're up to.
Have you ever had a side job where you need to fill in the gaps of not working as a graffiti street artist?
Not really. Why am I never worried about doing it?
Yeah, or are you worried if you continue like as you are, even though you get your jobs and you're very successful with it, when you get your dry periods, as you're saying, you just do your personal work, but does that worry you?
Yeah, I think every freelancer is worried that their next job could be their last. I think that's always going to be a worry. There's no guarantee, but my philosophy is there's no guarantees in life anyway. You know, you could go out tomorrow and get hit by a car. You just got to kind of, in my eyes, take each day as it comes, and yeah, just hopefully try and enjoy the uncertainty as well. Some people have to have a very concise plan of.
Do you get annoyed with knowing how you've started as a graffiti artist and how that has influenced your career as you've gone on, but kind of being there from the beginning? Do you get annoyed with all these street artists that have just suddenly come on the scene and seem to be doing really successfully, whereas you get all the professional people that were there from the beginning seem to maybe get a little bit forgotten about, because street art has in the images themselves are sort of, they're very lovely, they're very painted very nice, they're decorative, they're a pleasure to look at, rather than graffiti isn't really that pleasurable to look at. Some might argue. Do you resent the street art in a slight way? I know you do street art, but do you resent how popular street art has become, and graffiti still kind of has
it's frustrating when it's frustrating when someone comes along that hasn't been painting for very long, but maybe they just tap into something that's very like commercial, or they somehow just blow up via Instagram or social media, and then and they haven't really got the history behind them or necessarily the skill set. But I find that the majority of those artists tend to be flash in the pan artists. They'll blow up, something will happen, but they haven't got the legacy behind them for their work to sustain. So yeah, I probably used to get more annoyed than I do now, because now I just see it as like, you can have your 15 minutes of fame. In the end, when all's said and done, you'll be remembered as an artist that got lucky for a little bit, and then quite easily.
Well, you you mentioned Instagram there. Is Instagram the only place where you can promote yourself as an artist, as graffiti street artist, or do you find other avenues that are quite helpful?
I think just talking to people is the most effective way of networking.
When you're out painting, or do you as somebody who
just in general, anyone you come across that you don't know, and you just talk about what it is you do, and you never know where that can lead. I think that's the most effective. Obviously, like, having a good following on Instagram is a nice backup. So if people do check out your page and you've got a significant following, maybe you'll be taken a little bit more seriously. But I think for the most part, there's a lot of ego involved in Instagram, and there are terrible artists on there that have got thousands and thousands of followers. So doesn't really make a lot of sense in terms of. I don't think artists are getting hired via Instagram. I think it's just it's the platform that makes the most sense for an artist, as opposed to say Facebook or Twitter, because it's just so instant and it's a visual.
So what do you think makes it successful Instagram for an artist? I mean, like you just said, there are probably quite a lot of terrible artists on Instagram that have a lot of following, but why do they have a lot of following if their skills as an artist isn't that great?
I don't know.
Although I'm sensing that, Tom, you're saying actually it doesn't matter. And I think that takes us to an interesting question. I think for artists generally, that it's for quite an introverted practice. I think a lot of artists, it's a lot of concentrating by yourself. It's very easy, especially in the social media age, to do a lot of comparisons, which I imagine 30 years ago were much harder to do. So I suppose, it might be about what actually is a good Instagram, but from what you've said, that doesn't seem to matter to you.
Well, I mean, I can only talk about my personal experiences, and I've got friends, graffiti artists, street artists that have got a massive following, and then it's quite easy for me to think, oh fuck, they're getting loads of work, or they're doing really well, and then I'll meet them and they're struggling, and you're like, oh, okay, there's just a whole lot of smoke and mirrors when it comes to Instagram. I don't think it's the be all and end all. I just think it's a good way to get your artwork seen, and it's also a good way to network. Like, I've met a lot of people and painted with a lot of people where it just wouldn't have been accessible or possible before Instagram. that's an exciting side. The collaborative side of it is interesting.
I sort of see Instagram as like the LinkedIn for artists.
Yeah, kind of. I have heard though of galleries that won't take artists on unless they've got a significant Instagram following.
Yeah, that's really bad.
Which is shit. I mean, can I swear on this, by the way?
Yeah, well, it's too late.
Okay. It's too late now. Anyway, yeah. So I don't, but I don't know if I'd want to be affiliated with a gallery that will showcase my work based on my Instagram following. That just feels really fake and.
Yeah, there's something about that leaves a bad taste, isn't there?
Yeah, it's like, are you hiring me because you want me to boost your Instagram following almost? Do you know? I mean, I think there is a lot of that. I think there's a strategy now for galleries they've realised how important it is. I think it's important that the galleries probably have got a big following because that's the way. So,
I suppose just on the point of galleries, I think it's easy to imagine for people how a painter with a canvas and a gallery work together, because you can just put the painting in the gallery. What do you do with a piece of wall? How do they work together?
Well, I personally don't tend to like. I separate what I'll do in a gallery to what I'll do on the street. Not
That's
massively, but I will make it.
In the set, oh, sorry, I keep interrupting. Well,
no.
Let me say what I say. So, in the sense of what, along the lines of what Gareth just asked, what if somebody took a picture of your graffiti or street art mural, whatever it is that you've done, and then goes and sells prints of it in a gallery of some sort? How does the sort of copyright issue there work?
It's never happened to me. It's not right, obviously. It's not right, but I don't know aspects that come into play. I just don't know. It's not happened. It's not happened to me. You've had artists in America that have had their artwork ripped off and then used by big name fashion brands, and they've been successfully sued. But in terms of like taking a photo or a picture and reproducing that, I don't know. I don't know how that would work. It's not something that's happened to me.
I mean, I suppose that's a way into getting a mural piece into a gallery for yourself. Take a picture of it and hang it in, print it out and stick it on the gallery wall.
A really practical road.
Yeah. No, I don't. I personally don't like seeing. I think there are certain things that should remain. There's a certain aesthetic to painting in the street that just can't be very setting. So, most of the big name artists that have come from the graffiti world, when they then step into a fine art arena or a gallery arena, their work tends to be massively different from the work they were creating in the street. You can see there's a link, but it's generally very different, and it's generally stuff. I think you should, if you're working in a gallery, you should take advantage of that construct and medium, and not try and recreate what you're doing in the street.
So there's a lot of social context to street art.
I think so, yeah. The best street art and graffiti, I think, yes.
I think it's interesting. So I think, if people think about famous street artists, that, the first one they're going to think of is obviously Banksy. And so much of his work has a lot of social commentary. Is that something that you find is actually a big feature of street art generally? Or actually is it not that? Is all street art social commentary, or is it not as Banksy-ish as people might imagine?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I think it's social commentary the minute you choose to paint in the street. Regardless, if you're choosing to put it in the street, it's because you want to engage a reaction with the public, or your like fellow graffiti writers and artists. What was the question again?
I suppose that my question was, does street art typically have a social commentary element, or is that just us thinking about Banksy?
I think typically it probably does have a social element. But then, yeah, I'd argue that, like, I remember talking to a graffiti artist friend of mine, and he was asked, oh, instead of just painting your name in the street, you know, why don't you paint something more political? Painting and empowering himself in the street was a political message in itself, and it doesn't need to be on the nose. It's just the fact that he's taking this part of public is a political act in itself. It doesn't have
to. On this note, what do you enjoy more? Statement pieces that are sort of have a message, or, you know, accidentally have a message, like for an example, one of the pieces that you did was a mural of a man consuming a woman's head, and that had quite an effect, I should say, on a lot of women.
I don't know if it had an effect on a lot of women. I can only guess, because it was painted over.
By the comments, the fact that it was painted over, and just how it sort of blew up a little bit on Instagram. Was that intentional? Did you think that would happen from it? Or was the whole point?
It was a provocative image, but then I think if you're painting something like that, it's if it shocks someone or makes someone feel uneasy, I think it's done its job. I think it's important to paint images that make people question.
So do you prefer painting images like that, or just going out having fun with your mates, or even by yourself, and just doing any?
Depends on my mood at the time. Just depends on my mood.
So you don't.
No, like yesterday, I painted a piece about Trump.
Yeah, you did a zombie version of Trump as well. That had.
Yeah, so like that, you know, that was a personal piece. I wouldn't go to a graffiti area with my friends like that in somewhere where it's only going to get seen by graffiti artists, because it defeats the point. That was like a response to what's going on at the moment, so it makes sense that it's accessible to the public, so that they can respond.
So in a sense, you do have to pre-plan where you're going to paint a little bit according to your image.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, if it usually when I paint something illustrative, it tends to be something that I'm more interested in than, you know, respect from my graffiti mates. But then sometimes I'm like, all I want to do is just go somewhere with my graffiti guys and then just paint some straight up graffiti that's not for anyone else but myself, and, you know, for my friends and for the guys on, you know, social media that will appreciate it. That's just for me, and that's quite a nice. That's quite therapeutic for me. Like, I wouldn't like say like the thing I painted yesterday wasn't the most fun thing to paint, because I had to be so precise about making sure that very obviously like Trump. So it was quite a stressful paint. It was hot, but the end result I love. The end result was awesome. So it was worth it. But yeah, just different. Sometimes I just want to paint something. Other times I want to make more of a statement, and in that case, it's got to be a bit more refined.
So with your statement pieces, are you creating them because they're meaningful towards you, or are you just doing it to get a reaction?
I don't really paint a great deal of statement pieces. I mean, yeah, I've done maybe 3 or 4 pieces that you could say were somewhat political. So yeah.
But were they like, although you don't paint that much statement pieces, was it a message that you wanted to get out because it was strong to you, or were you just doing it for the reactions and the likes or whatever?
No, I mean, no, I'm not doing it. I don't paint for the likes. I paint because it's something that I feel like it would be dishonest of me, I think, as an artist, if you're engaged in what's happening in the world. And yesterday being Blackout Tuesday, if I was to go out and just paint a piece of graffiti, it just doesn't make sense to me. Or you've got to kind of react to how you're feeling at the time. And that was just an honest reaction to. It's just about just being honest about what you're feeling at that moment. But you know, if I had gone out and just painted a stupid piece of graffiti, that's fine as well, because like, you can do what you want. Like in this, yeah, as far as yesterday goes, I wanted to paint. I fucking hate Trump and wanted to express it.
Yeah. Sort of separate to that point. So just one of the things that you said just a moment ago is, you know, it's fine to paint what you like. And that made me think, you know, and also you're talking about how technical the Trump piece was. And that made me wonder, how do you practice? So for instance, if I'm, you know, doing something on a piece of paper, I can do several versions of it and I can scrap it and start again. Is that possible with a wall? Like, how do you manage that? So if you'd made a mistake, how would you correct it? And how would you practice? That's something I'm really interested in.
Well, the practice side is just trial and error over a number of years. So that is just getting better. You know, if you trying to learn how to surf, it would take you 10 years before you were riding massive waves and crests and stuff. They say it takes 10 years to become the master of any craft. To master a craft takes 10 years. So yeah. As far as the Trump thing goes, and I had a few reference images that I printed off. So it wasn't a complete, I didn't want it to be a carbon copy of a photorealistic portrait because it wouldn't be identifiable as my style. So a mixture of different elements that I'd found online and sketched. And then, yeah, but I think, you know, like with spray paint, it's such a quick, fast drying medium that even if you make a mistake, it's so easy to correct.
Yeah.
So yeah, just you know, it's a lot of fiddling around until it looks how you want it to look.
Yeah. What you just said, so for instance, you said you didn't want it to look photorealistic, and earlier you talked about how like you got inspiration from comic books. So when you're drawing people, is it useful to think of it as if it's in like that caricature 60s cartoon style? Is that sort of how you think about your style when you're drawing people?
Yeah, I guess there's just a graphic nature to my work that comes from looking at animation and comics and illustrators that's hopefully identifiable. That maybe if I come from a fine art background, it you know, I'd have a different approach. But that was my training, like reading comics and watching anime, reading manga and stuff. That's definitely heavily influenced like my style. Yeah.
Sorry, Annie, go ahead.
No, I was going to say if there was any particular artists back in the day and now working that have influenced you as you've grown to be an artist.
Yeah, so many. But I find it really difficult to answer that because there are so many. And I don't
probably one or two names you could say. You know.
When I first started looking at when I first discovered Crayola's work, Greg Simpkins from LA, seeing his work was the first time I saw how you could transition from painting graffiti into becoming like a very talented, technical, surrealist artist, an illustrator. It made me see that the two worlds didn't have to be exclusive. You could do both, or come from one and do the other, and make that a successful transaction journey. Whatever. So he had a lot of impact on me when I was a bit younger, maybe 10 years back. Kind of made me want to learn how to paint, maybe like properly paint and understand color. But yeah, so many artists. I don't know. You look at all these artists, and then subconsciously elements of each artist's style will seep in without you even knowing it, and then you will end up drawing, and something will come out, and you'll be like, "Oh, that looks a little bit like, you know, the way I've done that hand is similar to how that artist does hands that I was looking at 3 days ago," or just, you know, little nuances that find their way into your work, having studied other. And then everyone's style is at the end of the day a mixing pot of everything they've seen and experienced. So yeah.
So do you think there's nothing new that any artist can make nowadays? Like,
I don't think there's ever been anything truly new. It's all just taking elements from other art and mixing it in a way that gives you your own personal formula.
Yeah.
Like cooking.
Like cooking. On that point, you talk about your own personal formula. And it comes from all sorts of different diverse sources that fuse together. But is there a piece of work that you've done that you think that's my style? That's like, if I had to point someone to my work, that's the example that I'd give.
That's a good question. Probably, yeah. I can't pinpoint which one at this moment in time, but I've probably done. I think I've done about maybe. But the thing is, it changes. So, like, yeah, at this point in time, I could say there are 4 or 5 pieces that I think I've executed to the best of my abilities that speak about, that highlight what my tastes are. But then in another 5 years, they'll probably look old and dated to me. So it's like, it's usually that my last piece is usually my favorite. And then it will take like a year for me to look back on it and be like, no, actually, what was I thinking about? Like, this is off, and I can do this differently, and the shading there is really like messed up. And yeah, but that's the whole thing. That's the whole process. You're constantly trying to find that sort of idea of yourself aesthetically that probably doesn't really exist, but it's about constantly chasing that, and that drive is what improves your work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose we are coming towards the end of our recording now. But if people wanted to find more of your work or learn more, where should they go?
You can go to my website, which is tomblackford.co.uk, or my Instagram, which is at Tom Blackford Art.
Great. All right. Well, Tom, thank you so much for spending the beginning of this afternoon with us. And we'll put this out and we'll share as much of your work as we can.
Wicked. All right. Well, yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, good luck with getting through this awful time.